Hello and welcome. My name is Benjamin Stewart at benjaminlstewart.net. This is Pedagogical Dialogues, an educational podcast making teaching and learning more transparent. Pedagogical Dialogues is a podcast mainly focused on curriculum, assessment, and instruction, focusing on those topics as it relates specifically to anyone who has an interest in learning English as an additional language, or anyone interested in teaching English as an additional language. Before we get into today's topic, if you have any thoughts, insights, or want to share any of your experiences, feel free to reach out to me at my Twitter handle at BNLEEZ, or any of my socials located at the top of my website at benjaminlstewart.net. Today also, we're broadcasting live in Facebook, in the Facebook page called Applied Linguistics. And as I'm talking here, I have some foam here that's just falling off to the side. So we're falling apart here. But yeah, feel free to reach out to me. Feel free to leave comments in the post if you're watching this broadcast live in Facebook in the Applied Linguistics page. Feel free to jump in and leave comments in real time if you're watching this live. If you're watching this, of course, the recording later on, feel free to post there as well, as I frequently check that page. Today I want to talk about a framework that I've been thinking about, that I've posted in the past on several occasions. And the framework that the ideas that I put together, really the idea is to try to bring additional opportunities to the classroom, the formal educational context, trying to mix both informal and formal classes, or formal and informal educative experiences, trying to bring those together. Over the last, I would say, 10 years or so, maybe 10, 12 years, MOOCs have become quite common. A lot of larger institutions are making their courseware available to the public. And we're starting to see a mix of those students who are enrolled in a particular class versus those who are taking it just for non-credit. They just want to take the course. And when you're thinking about, as a teacher, designing this type of class where maybe some aspect of it is open, some of it is being shared publicly, perhaps, I started to think about this framework of what certain types of questions might come up. What kinds of questions might we ask ourselves to really get the most out of that kind of experience? So I call this framework the S.C.H.O.O.L framework. This is an acronym that stands for scalable, collaborative or collaboration, higher order thinking, openness, ongoing learning processes, and a love of learning. So let's break this down. I'd like to spend some time unpacking each of these in the form of presenting additional questions that relate to each of these. You know, as teachers, we have a lot of challenges that we're currently facing. Of course, we're 2 years into COVID, so that has changed a lot in terms of the type of educative experience that we're designing, what kind of classroom, and how we're presenting our content. I did a podcast earlier this week related to different types of communication, synchronous versus asynchronous, online versus offline, even thinking about different types of theories that most apply to our teaching practice. But today I want to think about these challenges that we're looking at and seeing how this S.C.H.O.O.L framework might address some of these challenges. In some of our cases, we might have larger class sizes. Maybe we have a heavier academic load. Maybe we have less time for professional development. Maybe we don't have enough opportunities to collaborate and work with other colleagues. Maybe we just don't have enough time to plan our lessons as all of these additional constraints have taken up a lot of our time. I'd like to take the first aspect of the school framework, scalability, scalable, and think of how this relates specifically to larger class sizes, but also think of the formal classroom, students who are enrolled in a particular class, and also perhaps making that scalable to others who also might be interested. And again, thinking of a MOOC, a massive open online course, any courses that are being opened, an open courseware type of situation, and trying to mix and think of how we're presenting our classes in terms of scalability. How can we make it scalable? How might we use technology in order to present or make our lecture available? Maybe learning activities, the actual activities that students are participating in. What kind of technologies would be appropriate to make those activities scalable? Thinking of student and teacher feedback. How can different technologies be used to get the most out of the feedback, or how we assess our students, or how students assess themselves? Again, whether it's through peer assessment or just self-assessment. And learning outcomes, the actual products, the performances, the end result. Where does that reside? How can we use technology to make those outcomes also scalable? We might even look at different platforms to help us make the educative experience more scalable. What kind of content management system, a CMS or a learning management system, an LMS, are most appropriate? Is it going to be open or closed, which we'll talk about a little bit more in detail? But just overall, what kind of platforms or social media would help make the educative experience more scalable? Okay, and so think of the technologies that you're currently using. Every semester when I begin a new semester with new students, even though perhaps I've taught the same class many times, I start again thinking about what kind of technology is going to help me make the experience scalable. Now, maybe the class is not open to the public, but again, thinking of larger class sizes, how can we make it more scalable so that we have a more inclusive and equitable experience for each learner, that they have many different ways that they can participate. They have a lot of different entry points into the experience. And in most cases, technology is going to help us achieve that. Collaboration. So the C in the acronym S.C.H.O.O.L stands for collaboration, and it could also apply to cooperation. Think of the first question here. How can collaboration and cooperation cultivate creativity, community, and a learning culture that is fostered through social learning that transfers to real-world experiences, one which makes learning more relevant and meaningful? So this idea of an educative experience being relative and meaningful. Relevant to the student based on their wants and their needs, their interests, their preferences. Perhaps it's not enough to be meaningful. Meaningful might be something that's relevant to a real-world experience, but maybe it's not relevant to that particular, let's say, student majoring in a particular area. So this aspect really requires the instructor to reach out to the students to know what their goals are, what their interests are, what their past experiences have been, maybe in that particular content area. What do they know already? What can they do? What maturity level should be considered also is very important. Their overall dispositions, so on. Think about also in terms of collaboration, what kind of grouping patterns are ideal for specific learning outcomes of the activity, the task, or the performance? Will there be a lot of individual work, pair work? Will there be small groups? If in small groups, will they be homogeneous or heterogeneous groups? Are we dealing with mixed abilities? And so does it make more sense to have more advanced students work with lower level students? Does it make more sense to group students based on level, academic level, versus what they know versus what they can do? These are some questions to think about whenever you're thinking about collaboration, trying to bring in collaborative learning into your mix. How much of the collaborative process should be based on the task at hand versus based on strategy and reflection? So here, this kind of question, of course, will depend on the situation, depend on the teacher, it will depend on the students. But ideally, students who can make decisions, they can assume different tasks and not only be more aware of their own process and getting the task completed, but also have some level of strategy or reflection, some way of thinking about their process, and have them decide for themselves which way to work with each other and perhaps individually makes the most sense for that particular task. And at what point will a reflection be also part of the learning process? Okay, so again, this will probably be a conversation with the instructor, depending again on the goals of that particular activity or performance or task. But this is a question that can come up, the difference between getting the task done, the task itself, versus also a more kind of a meta look at the learning process, thinking in terms of strategy and reflection. Another question related to collaboration: how will the team determine appropriate processes and products to complete? Now, this is related to what I just mentioned, but it specifically links the products and the processes. So again, to what degree will the students themselves make these decisions in terms of how will they work together and what will they end up completing at the end of the learning sequence? Now, if you're thinking about, as an instructor, you're looking at your students and you're working with your students in terms of trying to help them with the process and also the end result, the outcome. Oftentimes rubrics will be involved, and that's a whole nother discussion in terms of how you want to imply or to promote or use a rubric in terms of helping students complete the task. But that's another aspect, whether you design the rubric yourself as the instructor or it's a collaborative effort with the students, or maybe even you leave it completely up to the students. Okay, so again, it's going to depend on the course, the activity, the students themselves, and your preference as their instructor. Finally, how will individual roles and responsibilities be assigned? This is also an important piece of the collaborative process, is how students are making these decisions in terms of roles and responsibilities, and or to what degree the instructor will also go in and assist in helping them make those decisions. So learning to work together, making informed decisions, resolving cognitive conflict. We'll talk about these a little bit later, but there's a very close relationship between collaboration that we've just mentioned and higher order of thinking. So let's get into higher order of thinking. How much of critical thinking or a higher order of thinking should you focus on? All right, what aspects should you be thinking about? So let's look at some options here. We should set some kind of relevant and meaningful problem-solving situation. We have discussed that already, but a lot of times having this articulated, having a communication with students to figure out, okay, what's relevant and what's meaningful will help them see the purpose of the actual activity. If you can make this as relevant as possible, thinking in terms of, let's say, service learning, where actually the students are doing an activity for a greater good. Actually, you're reaching out and they're completing a service or product for a real audience, right? That would require a lot of higher order of thinking in terms of what the problem is, what a possible solution is, what kind of needs are relevant to the target audience. Again, linking the possible solutions to a problem is going to help them develop this higher order of thinking. Making decisions as an individual versus a group in ways that avoid coercion, yet still maintaining or meeting the goals of the individual and the group. This is very important too, I think, in ways to promote higher order thinking is having that discussion amongst the team, making sure that each person has a voice, but yet at some point group decisions will need to be made for the group, for trying to meet those group goals while still trying to maintain individual goals as well. Reaching consensus. Another way of building a higher order thinking is finding ways for students to reach a consensus, for students also to help them resolve cognitive conflict. Invariably, they're going to have disagreements within the team, within the group. So maybe even having a team charter, some kind of an agreement on how they're going to resolve cognitive conflict might also be part of the learning process. Determining relationships between ideas. So at some point, they're probably going to be comparing and contrasting something. Maybe they're looking for relationships between cause and consequence. Maybe it's a process that they need to unpack. Maybe they need to be thinking in terms of theoretical versus practical or abstract versus concrete thinking. There are many others. We've mentioned already problem, solution, but depending on the activity, depending on the objective of the performance or the task, these different aspects, these different relationships, or a combination of these relationships are going to be important to promote critical thinking or higher order of thinking. Moving on, now the openness. Openness. So we've talked about scalability, collaboration, higher order of thinking. Now we need to think in terms of openness. Now, to what degree will the educative experience remain open? That is, available to the public versus closed or private. Thinking of certain questions in terms of the degree in which the educative experience will remain open. The instructor's lectures and other content. To what degree will the instructor's lectures or any other content that the instructor creates, to what degree will that be made public? Will it be private or public? Expert lectures and other content. This is coming from an outside source. So think maybe in terms of a video, maybe it's already made public, but the question is, will that content that's already available publicly, how much will that be included within the classroom experience or the educative experience? Student engagement, so how students interact with each other, their engagement, how much of those activities will be made public. Student engagement with course-related content, all right? So we have not only their engagement with each other socially, but also their engagement with the course content. How much will that be made public? Student-generated content or performances or products. So anything that the students create, having completed an activity, a task, or a performance, to what degree will that be made public? To what degree will that be open to the public? Formative and summative assessment. So any assessments or feedback provided by the instructor to the students, whether it's formative or summative, to what degree will that be made public? If we think of a writing exercise and students are writing an essay and an instructor is providing feedback, maybe in the form of comments, maybe it's in the form of a video giving group feedback, to what degree will those kinds of feedback or those kinds of assessments be made public? Non-instructor or expert feedback. So if the performance, the task that the students are completing is made public, and let's say that there is legitimate target audience that's involved, perhaps there's an opportunity for students to receive direct feedback from outside experts. So again, to what degree will that be made public? To what degree will that feedback from those outside experts be made public? Thinking in terms of feedback, we could also look at peer feedback and even self-assessment. In the case of, let's say, reflection, personal reflection, to what degree will that kind of feedback or reflections also be made public? So a lot of questions to consider. Not to say that in every aspect it all needs to be open or all needs to be closed. We're really looking at this idea of transparency in terms of degree. To what degree should the educative experience be made open? Now, answering some of these questions that we've been listing here in terms of openness will depend in large part on the following. It might depend on, of course, personal preference. Personal preference by the instructor and perhaps by the students. School policy or culture. So depending on the institution or the school involved, maybe there are some requirements or even limitations in terms of answering some of these questions, in terms of the degree in which an educative experience could be open. There could be a school policy that could either hinder or certainly influence the degree into which a class is going to remain open. This is also going to depend a lot on the resources available, of course. So the degree to which a class is going to be open could depend a lot on the resources or the technologies that are available that would allow such openness. Speaking about technology, the students' prior experiences with technology and overall learning, their learning experiences that they've had in the past, their maturity level, their academic level, these are also factors that could influence one way or the other answering the questions that we're considering when it comes to openness. Another aspect that deals with openness relates to Creative Commons. Understanding the different flavors of Creative Commons will also influence the degree to which a class is being open. It could even be that something is in the public domain, but all of these questions and decisions that either a teacher makes or the school makes when it comes to Creative Commons, having a level of understanding of the different types of licenses that are available will also influence the way in which we answer some of these questions when it comes to openness. I mentioned before the types of communication, whether we're dealing with synchronous or asynchronous communication, offline, online, these are also factors that will influence this idea of openness. And of course, learning platforms. So overall, the technologies that are involved are going to dictate in large part how we answer these questions. Let's move on now to the next O of our school framework. And this stands for ongoing learning processes, or just ongoing learning. Now, with formal education, as we know, we typically have a time frame to complete course objectives, but this idea of ongoing learning extends beyond the classroom. So we want to think of it in terms of lifelong learning. We want to think of it as something that the students experience that they can keep with them for the long term. Really, the best way to think of keeping basically any kind of ongoing learning possible is in the form of an e-portfolio. I'm not going to dive too deep into an e-portfolio, but I think that if we categorize, generally speaking, an e-portfolio into two groups, one might be showing the students' best work, whether they decide themselves which work that would be, or it's a conversation with an instructor. But one way to think of an e-portfolio would be to present their best work. The second type, generally speaking, of an e-portfolio would be the products or the artifacts that are included in there would represent some kind of learning process. So maybe it's not necessarily their best work, but it's work that best illustrates or demonstrates a learning, what they actually learned. And so this might be in the form of certain reflections or notes, some kind of annotations that are part of the artifacts that are being shared and published in the e-portfolio. But the question really becomes to what degree that e-portfolio becomes open. The ongoing learning process, in order for it to be ongoing, that is well beyond the course, maybe even the degree program, but let's say even as they become professionals, the technologies, the way in which that e-portfolio is made public will also, of course, influence the degree to which it remains ongoing, right? So if we have students that are creating, let's say, Wix pages, Weebly pages, maybe a WordPress, a site, but they have something that they are contributing to. Let's say they are adding works from a variety of classes. It's not an e-portfolio per class, but it's a personal, professional e-portfolio. So there's one portfolio per student, for example. Then the idea would be to contribute. The student they would be adding content to their e-portfolio over time, so that they would, at the end of their, let's say, their college experience, they would have a resume along with an e-portfolio in order for them to demonstrate what they know, what they can do, and their disposition. So online or ongoing learning processes, for me, relate a lot to this idea, this concept of having an e-portfolio. Now, the last aspect, the love of learning. For me, basically, a love of learning focuses on the learner, focuses on the learning process by categorizing, generally speaking, the learner and the teacher into three different either roles or responsibilities. If the learner is very much reliant on others based on what they know, what they can do, then the learner is becoming basically dependent on others in order to achieve some task. So in that particular scenario, we could say that the teacher is probably assuming more of a didactic leader. The teacher is the more knowledgeable other, and the teacher is helping the students. And the learner is very much dependent on the teacher or any other more knowledgeable other. Maybe it's another student, maybe it's an outside expert. But regardless, the learner is dependent on or very much reliant on others in order to complete the task. The second transition might be where students are less reliant on others. So maybe they're more independent when it comes to completing the task, which would require the teacher then to assume more of a facilitating role. So the teacher as a facilitator is helping the learner who's becoming more independent, able to basically complete the task on his own, on her own. Now, the third phase, or the transition that we want to consider, and really ideally learners should try to reach this level, is that the learner becomes more interested in the success of others. That is, the learner is becoming more interdependent. They are more concerned about the success of their classmates, for example. Maybe they themselves are taking on a teacher role to help others achieve their goals or objectives. In this scenario now, the teacher is assuming more of a coach or a coaching role. The teacher pretty much is there only as needed, but the student really is assuming more responsibility and being able to help others achieve their goals. So in any particular moment, the teacher and or student are in and out of these roles depending on the task at hand. Okay? The idea is that the teacher is trying to transition the student from being dependent to becoming independent to becoming interdependent over time in terms of what they know, what they understand, their understandings that they've achieved, what they can do, their skill sets, and perhaps even their disposition or their overall attitude. I think that having a love of learning really keeps these roles and responsibilities in mind. Of course, we want to focus on the student in terms of what they enjoy, what they want, what they need, their preferences. We want to bring that into the mix. But I think if we keep these three steps or phases in mind, and that we're likely to be shifting even within within a daily basis, going in and out, moving in and out of these roles, then the students will have a love of learning based on the role that they are assuming. They see that they're moving through this transition. Maybe before they were more dependent, depending on what they were doing, but now they are becoming more dependent or independent and interdependent, helping others. They can see their own process. I think that they will gain an appreciation of their own learning. There is a quote here that stands out to me, especially as it relates to love of learning, that reads, "Risk more than others think is safe. Care more than others think is wise. Dream more than others think is practical. Expect more than others think is possible." I think those are good words to live by. Today, I want to share with you, or I did share with you, this school framework, making learning more inclusive and equitable. I hope this resonates with you. I'm curious what you think. Let me know if any of this resonates with you. If you have anything to add or disagree with anything, feel free to reach out to me at my Twitter handle at BNLEEZ. Today, I'm providing a live broadcast in the Applied Linguistics Facebook page. So if you're interested in joining the page, if you haven't already, and you want to leave me some feedback, whether it's on this particular broadcast or if you're interested in sharing your research. I know a lot of you are conducting research and have some questions. If anyone wants to schedule time to have a discussion, an open discussion about your work, about your research, feel free to do so. One of the main intentions or reasons for setting up the page was to have a conversation related to research. So if you have questions about your topic, if you have just anything that you want to share, I know when I was doing my own research, it was helpful to have opportunities to discuss with anyone, really, your research. Just by discussing it with as many different people, as many different individuals as possible, I think it helps orient you in terms of your process, where you've been and where you still need to go. And just getting additional feedback, I think, is generally a good thing. All right, so this has been Pedagogical Dialogues, an educational podcast making teaching and learning more transparent. My name is Benjamin Stewart at benjaminlstewart.net. Thanks for listening.